Well, welcome everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in today. I am really excited about this interview. You've joined Intersection, and I'm Rose Zacharias Meeder, and today we're hosted at the Face Strong Today studio, which is kind of fun, and also there's a video component to our interview today, and that's kind of fun too. So thanks for tuning in, for joining us. I am so excited to sit down with my guest, Holley Gerth. So welcome.
Thank you, Rose. I'm so glad to be with you.
Welcome to this show,
and
to this opportunity to have conversation. I mean, I'm a big fan of books, and I even belong to 2 book clubs.
Wow.
And so over the years, when I've been able to take the time in between other responsibilities and actually get through to the very end of the book, meet with the women in my book club, I get really excited about like digesting and discovering and exploring together what we've appreciated about the book. But it's a rare opportunity for me to, after having finished a book, to get to sit down and talk to the author of the book.
Oh.
And so I was excited for this opportunity, and I'm just really glad to have this conversation.
Well, I appreciate you reading the whole book.
And so this is really great to sit down and chat. You know, Holley, I mean, this isn't your first book. What I know about you is that you're a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of not just one, but several books. You're also a certified life coach and a speaker. And that really you love connecting with the hearts of women through your very popular blog and the books that you write and the speaking that you do. So. Today, for this hour, I get to be one of those women.
Yes, all of that sounds so fancy. You like
it's
say
a long,
it, and I'm like,
sentence.
who is that person?
Okay, it's a long, big sentence, and it really is you. I mean, there's been some amazing, this is my opportunity to gush. There's been some amazing words spoken about you. I mean, Anne Voskamp, and I'm going to read it word for word because I would never presume to put words in her mouth. She herself, being the New York Times bestseller, has called your book, Fiercehearted, brilliant, stunning, winsome, and a book that not only you simply have to read, but one that you will want to return to again and again. She didn't want it to end, and now she wants to. You've inspired Anne Voskamp to live fierce-heartedly.
So kind.
So
kind.
Super cool. And there's just been many, many other accolades. Lisa Turkhurst has written a glowing report of your book. And these are women that I admire and respect and have been influenced
me too.
by.
All of that is very humbling.
So it's all true. And also, and yet, I want to ask you, if I was to sit down like I am right now, who is Holley Gerth? Who would you say you are?
I would say I am a girl loved by Jesus, first and foremost.
Okay.
Yes, and writer and wife to a great man, Mark. We met in college. And
how many years have you been married?
We have been married 17 years this month. So.
Were you married in the year 2000?
Yes.
Okay, I was married in the year 2000.
Oh, that's fun. What month?
So 17 years, June 24th.
Okay, so we are just a little bit after you. It makes it easier to remember how long you've been married.
I know, exactly.
I'm not good at the
very beginning of the century.
Like, that's what it is, 17 years.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
okay.
Yes, so we've been married. He's actually on this trip with me, which I love. We get to travel a lot together, and that really helps. He's a great guy.
Okay.
And we have a really unexpected family story, and so we basically adopted a grown-up daughter when she was 20 who had aged out of the foster system because we couldn't have kiddos. And she had a baby a month ago, so we are now grandparents too.
Holley, that's so great. I mean, you share about this experience in your book, Fiercehearted. And I just love knowing that about you. Like how particularly interesting and unique that when you adopted her, she was 20 years old.
She was.
Right?
Yeah.
Will you tell us a little bit more? Because I know I've read the book and I'm encouraging people to do it. But tell me a little, what's her name?
Yeah, her name's Lavelle.
Lavelle. So tell me a little bit more about how Lavelle came into your life and how now you're celebrating her daughter as being your granddaughter.
Yes. Well, Mark and I got married, and like most folks, we thought, okay, we'll wait a few years and start a family, no big deal. But for us, it just didn't work out. So we went through a lot of years of just heartbreak and loss and asking God, like, what's going on? You know, we're asking for this really good thing, and it's happening for everyone around us, you know, but not for us. And so it's so far back now that I can talk about it without all the pain. But at the time, it was really painful. And we just thought, what does this mean? And so God put it on our hearts. So one night I was watching a documentary, like a 2020 type thing.
Right.
And they were talking about foster kids who age out of the system. And basically at 18, they're told, have a nice life. And I just had one of those moments where I was like, that's not okay. Like, who's going to walk them down the aisle? Who's going to help them figure out their careers? Who's going to rock their babies? Like, you know,
because they haven't had family their entire years in the foster system, and now they're being released from foster care, and they really are independent individuals. And this is how the system's been working for years. So when you became aware of that, it made you think about doing some kind of amazing things.
So people would ask me, like, have you thought about adoption? And I started saying, well, if I adopt, I'm going to adopt a 20-year-old, which is a funny answer. And so one of my friends said, well, do you know about Saving Grace? And it turned out there was like a transitional living home being built in our town for girls who age out of the foster system or would otherwise be homeless.
Okay.
And so life got really busy then. I started writing books. I did connect with the founder. And then years later, she invited me to a banquet celebrating the girls. And it was the week of my birthday, and I felt like my word for that year was to be love. And I went that night, and I met Lavelle, which is like the word love with L-L-E on the end. And so we connected that night, and then she ended up reading one of my books and texted me and said, your book's really helping me. And so we started that little conversation and then had lunch, and she met my husband, and over a period of months, it just became really clear that we were supposed to be family.
Wow.
And so we had been on our journey of infertility for about a decade at that point, and she had been going through really hard things for about the same amount of time.
Because what was a little bit of her story? Like, why was she in the foster system?
Just a lot of abuse and just, you know, hard circumstances, and basically just didn't have the support of a mom and dad. And so, so we had both been praying, you know, we had been praying for a child, she had been praying for parents, and we had both almost gotten to the point where we were like, okay, this probably isn't going to happen. And then God was like, here you go. So if someone's listening, you know, and they're in that place where they think, I've prayed this prayer so long, I've hoped this hope for what feels like forever, and I'm not sure if God even hears, like, it's reassuring to know He does. Like, all that time, He was working out the details behind the scenes. And it's a totally different story than what we expected. But now we're like, of course. Like, of course, you were supposed to be ours all along. Like, she loves to write, which I didn't know when we first met. She has a blog now. She just got published in a little devotional book, you know. And she married a guy who's an auditor. My dad's an auditor, so they're like cut from the same cloth and love to talk about spreadsheets and fraud at the holidays.
Because that's not the most common occupation, but then you have two in the family.
So like, there's just all these little details where it's like, you know, God knew all along. And so I definitely had those moments where I was discouraged and felt hopeless, but, you know, God is working out a story. It's just different than the one we've written in our heads, you know?
Yeah, so Holley, that's a huge statement for you to make. I mean, we are cohorts in that we've been married the same year, and God did bless me with children when I wanted them. That's my story. But I have walked alongside people who struggled with infertility. My own sister, actually, which just didn't seem fair. That I had four children. My sister longed for one pregnancy, just one pregnancy, and so for you to sum it up and say, for a decade we struggled, longing for a baby and never having a baby. How can you even come to the end of that? How did you survive those 10 years?
I think it started when we had a miscarriage, actually. And I had kind of been this person who was like, I'm okay, I'm fine, you know? And at that point, I didn't have that option anymore because I was not okay and I couldn't make myself be, you know? And my default mode when I'm stressed or afraid is to try harder. And in this circumstance, that does not fix anything. So we went to small group that night shortly after that loss, and I was like going to try to be okay, and you know, God's going to work this out, it's going to be fine. And instead I was just like, I cried and I just said like, this is what's going on in our lives and I'm just not okay. And I felt like, okay, they're going to just tell me to get it together and to have faith, and God's going to be mad at me that I'm not okay. And instead they just came around us and like just literally hugged us, but also just with their words and their prayers, and they were just like, of course you're not okay, you know? You're not supposed to be. And so just realizing like it was okay to be honest about where I was, you know, and learning to do that, to have some safe people in my life that, like when I rounded the corner in the grocery store and there was a woman with her baby in front of the cereal that I was like suddenly crying in front of, you know, the granola bars, and to be able to like tell someone in my life, yeah, I had a little meltdown today, and you know, I never knew when that would happen, and it happened less frequently the longer time went on. But I think it starts there with just like being honest. And then I feel like God just gave me like this little seed of hope, you know, that was always there. I wore a ring that said hope every day through all those years, so I could look at it and be like, okay, I'm just not going to give up. I'm just not going to give up hope. And he also brought me to a place where I remember specifically one day I felt led to Genesis, where Eve is called the mother of all living. And I felt like he showed me that all women are mothers in some way because we all bring life to the world in some way. And so I was like, I'm not barren, you know? I just am a mom in a different way. So for a long time before Lavelle, I thought that was probably my books, that I was going to be a book mama. And my small group, my same small group, even threw me a book shower instead of a baby shower. Yes, it was so sweet.
Yes. Okay. So they were calling you the book mama, and all your books were your babies.
Yes.
Right.
So I was like, okay, maybe this is what it's going to look like. And so I think God like really did some healing in my heart from an identity sense. Because I think as a woman, that's like something you can really take on. Yes. You know?
For sure.
And I think there's
culturally
just like
in our society,
all kinds of ways of being a mom. There's all kinds of infertility. Like for some women, it'd be like, it's any dream that is not coming into being. So someone might be listening and say, I'm single, or I want a particular job and the door hasn't opened, or I'd like to go back to school and I haven't been able to, or you know, I want my prodigal child to come home and they haven't. Like, I think that can give us as women that same sense of like barrenness. And so just knowing like that is not who we are. We are all going to face something like that in our lives because we live in a fallen, broken world. But that's not our identity. That even in those moments, we are still beloved daughters of God. And he is still writing a story that is full of his faithfulness. And that doesn't mean we don't grieve. Like I grieved. I ugly cried in the bathroom lots of times. And I got mad a lot of times.
Okay, you must have, because even now when you're talking, I mean, that is such a mature, wise conclusion to come to. But you talk about 10 years of pain. Like in there, didn't you get angry?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And bitter?
I don't know if I ever got to bitter. Okay. But I got really mad.
Angry.
Yeah.
And you would have had the right to say, this is not fair.
Yes. Every time
and why me?
Yes. Both of my sister-in-laws got pregnant while we were trying. I mean, you know, like just, there are lots of times. And I think all of those thoughts are okay. You know, and I would even just tell God, like, I'm mad today. I'm sad. I don't understand. You know, that was a lot of it. I was just like, I don't understand. Like, I think we'd be good parents. You know, like, why is this not working out for us? Like, are you mad at me? Am I in trouble? Am I not doing something right? Like, if I could just be a better person or a better Christian, then will you say yes? And I think we all, like I was saying, we all do that. Like, if I just change, will I be able to get married or get this job or have this dream come true? But
right, and start to negotiate and strategize. Like, well, what about this? If I do this, can I have that?
And I think that's also a strategy of the enemy to go after our hearts, to say like, this somehow must be your fault. Like, there must be something wrong with you, or this would have worked out. Because he's always going to bring in that shame and guilt, you know, whenever he can. So that, too, like saying, I'm not going to receive that. Like, I'm not going to receive that idea that somehow this is happening to me because I've done something wrong. Instead, it's just, we can't see the full picture, you know. And again, I'm not trying to say that lightly, because I did cry and get mad and all that along the way, but from the perspective now, or even like, you know, John the Baptist and Elizabeth, his mama was infertile into her older age, and she could have said, well, I must have done something wrong, but it was just that God's timing and God's plan was different than what she had pictured. And so I think that's important. I think that can help sustain us too, to not take on that shame and guilt and say, this is my identity, but this is just my circumstance.
It is wise, and those are good words, and I believe that you come by them honestly, because struggling with infertility is such a raw wound that God would have had to heal in order for you to come and be able to say that with the insight that you've earned. I'm glad you've come through that. I'm glad you have Lavelle. And what's your granddaughter's name?
Ellie. That's her nickname. Her full name is Eula Ellen. So she is named after my dad's mom, her first name. And then her middle name, Ellen, is the middle name of all the women on my mom's side. So I'm an Ellen, my mama's an Ellen. Lavelle took Ellen as her middle name. Right. Like all the way, my grandma, all the way back up.
How many years ago, Holley, did she come into your family? How many years ago did you adopt her?
I met her 4 years ago next month, and we made things official 3 years ago by changing her name and some things. And the fun thing that God is in the details, August 28th is what we call Gerth Day in our family.
Okay, why?
Because we made things official.
Yes.
And so we celebrate it like a birthday, and Ellie was born on Gerth Day. August 28th, yes.
Okay, that's so cool.
Yes, like I said, like God knew, you know?
Because you're pre-established August 28th.
Yes,
it's Gerth Day.
Every year it's on the, I didn't even realize it until it's a recurring, you know, appointment on my calendar, because we celebrate it every year. So when Lavelle said, you know, Ellie's coming on this day,
okay,
I
that's
was
super
like,
cool. I love that.
She's coming on Gerth Day. So, and she did.
Holley, I want to talk a little bit about your book. A lot about your book, actually. But I love how you open up the very first writing in your book. You talk about not wanting to write this book. That's your very first line, that you actually tried not to write this book. That writing this book for you was going to be so scary, so raw, so vulnerable, and you even used the word scandalous, and that with the writing of this book, you crossed a line. That's some heavy stuff. It certainly captured my attention as a reader when you were that honest in the very first chapter. And here you have written this book. So was it all that for you?
Yeah, I think I wrote the introduction last, and so I wrote those words having, you know, finished the book and still feeling that way. Yeah, so you, I mean, you've shared about your infertility. You've said that this book is a work of rawness and vulnerability. Where else in the book did you find that you had to dig really deep in order to get this book written the way you were intending to write it? Yeah, well, even to start it, because it came out of a really difficult season in my life 2 years ago, fall of 2015. I'd been traveling all year, and I was exhausted and really in a place of burnout, which for me triggers depression and anxiety. I've struggled with those all my life, just part of who I am. And then I got really hurt by someone close to me. And I thought, I'm done. Like, I'm shutting my heart. I don't want to do this anymore. You know. And so I got on a flight actually to go see my publisher. And I'd, for the first time, missed the deadline, which I was terrified to tell them, but they're so gracious. And I was sitting on a plane in the dark, thinking all these things about, like, that's it. I'm done with the humans. You know, I want to go to a desert island. And I felt like Jesus was just kind of asking me, is that really what you want to do? Are you ready to learn a different way? And so at first I was like, no, I don't want to learn a different way. Like, I just want to be done. But over time, as I sat there, I was like, okay, yeah, you know, I do. I want to learn a different way to live and love. And all I had with me was my Kindle. And so I pulled out my Kindle, and it's like on the plane in the dark. I'm like typing with my little fingers, scaring the person next to me, you know, probably. And I wrote out the Fiercehearted manifesto that it's at the very beginning of the book.
Yeah.
And for me, that was like this declaration of like, I'm not going to quit. It's like the warrior on the battlefield who gets knocked down and is laying there and has to decide, like, am I getting back up or not?
I know. It's like David writing a psalm, actually, when I think about this Fiercehearted manifesto.
Well, not that I would compare myself to David,
well,
but
I
it's just one of those, like,
because
moments.
Yeah. And those words came to you?
Yes. I wrote them on the plane. And I landed and read them to my publisher and said, this is what I'm supposed to write about. But I didn't know until that moment. I was going to show up and tell them, I don't know what my next book is going to be.
But you wrote, you can't beat me. No, love is a risk and it reaches out. Understands kindness, takes real courage. A fierce-hearted woman believes the impossible, fights like she's unstoppable, dares to find beauty in a ragged soul. And he goes on and on. And I can't read your entire book out loud, this interview. That's pretty deep and raw and powerful. You use the words powerful and vulnerable, which I think, you know, in society doesn't really see. It's not often that those two words are used together, because to be powerful doesn't lend itself to vulnerability, it seems. And when we are most vulnerable, we certainly don't feel powerful.
Yeah.
So where has this come from in you, that you speak about it and believe it, this concept of vulnerability and power? Together in one?
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
I think it's what's modeled to us by Jesus. You know, like he stretched out on a cross like this. I can't think of a more vulnerable position, heart fully exposed, and yet it was the most powerful act ever done on this earth. You know? And so I think actually when we get all tough and I'm going to keep it together, that's fear, really. At least it is for me when I'm being the tough girl, or I'm trying to act perfect or not be vulnerable, you know. To me, that I'm living out of fear. But when I can dare to say, you know what, I don't have it all together, and I never will this side of heaven. Like, there are parts of my life that are messy. Here's what I'm struggling with. To me, that's an act of courage and bravery, because I'm saying, going to put myself out there, and I'm going to do so not so people can be like, oh, poor you, but to help set other people free, you know?
So with all that being said, what happened next then, sitting on the dark plane, having been so hurt by a good friend? I don't think you speak about the particular details of that hurt, but it sounds like it was very hurtful. And going to meet with your publisher, what happens next?
Well, I went and I read them that piece that you read part of, and there were lots of tears, and they were like, yep, this is it. Like, this is where you need to go. And so I went home and I started writing. I just started like showing up at a coffee shop every morning and just saying, okay, Jesus, like, what are we going to process today? You know, what do I need to write about? And that became a big part of my healing. You know, it was really transformational. I also called up my counselor and said, hey, I need to go to counseling again. I've got a lot going on. You know, I made an appointment with my doctor and said, I'm not feeling great. I need to figure out what's going on. I told my close friends, like, this is where I am. You know, I'm exhausted. I'm struggling with these things. You know, my husband and I had a lot of conversations about it. And so this book really was me writing my way through to a completely different place in my own life, you know? And I think that was a challenging thing because it would have been so much easier to do it years down the road. You know?
Right.
Like to look back on it.
When the pain was a little less recent, not so raw, it seemed like really like you actually agreed to write about it while you were in it.
But it was transformational for me. And I think that's why I'm so excited about this book, because I know what it did for my own life and heart, and that I'm not the same woman I was when I wrote the first sentence. You know, when I put the last period on the page, I was a completely different woman. And so...
Really?
Yeah.
How?
Well, because I feel like I now know how to live more fully and love more bravely. And that doesn't mean that I don't have struggles. I just went back to counseling last week because it was like I'm in this really intense season, like launching a book, I'm doing travel again. I need to be equipped to do all that well and not go back to those places. But I feel like I have so many more tools, and I feel so much more confident in God's love for me, and I feel like I know my own heart better in some ways that help me guard it, you know, because that's part of it. Like being fierce-hearted means, yes, putting your heart out there, but it also means knowing how to guard it and take care of it.
Okay.
And so I want that for my sisters too. You know, it's like when Jesus does something in your life, you're like, I don't want this just for me. I want this for every woman I know.
Yeah.
And so that's how I feel about this book. It almost feels like I'm not the author, that I just got to be like a listener, you know, and be a part of something that God did.
How did your marriage survive? Because I know that years of infertility will put a strain on a marriage. It just does, because two people grieve differently, cope differently, come to different conclusions at different times. And yet you're celebrating 17 years of marriage.
Yes.
How did your marriage survive?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, mostly we were on the same page, which I think was a real gift, because I know a lot of couples aren't. But I think we had also done some hard work before we hit that helped.
Okay.
Like my husband and I are very different. We're both introverts, but he is extremely practical and I'm extremely emotional. So like we went to premarital counseling and there's like this little chart of like, here's how you're both wired. And it was like, oh, together, you know, and the person was like, okay, this is you, you're practical, this is you, you're emotional, this is where you're gonna have problems. And they were totally right. And especially when Mark and I first got married, it was like we were speaking two different languages, you know? Yeah. Like I would be crying and he'd have these deer in the headlights look like, I don't know what to do. And like, it'd be our anniversary and he changed my wiper blades. It's like a romantic gesture. And it took me so long to like be able to translate into that, like that's a love poem, you know? So we started going every Saturday morning to have breakfast together so we could just practice talking to each other.
Did your counselor tell you to do that?
No, we just started doing it.
That.
We both like food.
And you're committed. Right. So it's a breakfast date, right, that had you both sitting down. Okay.
So that was one practical piece, but it was just, we had just said, okay, we've got to figure out how to understand each other because we love each other, but we are so different. So I think having that practice, you know, before we went through that hard thing. And then being able to walk through that together, I think actually helped our marriage. Right. And I know that's not the case for everyone, and I almost hate to say that because I don't want it to sound cliche or glib or like that's always the case. I understand it's not, but it's something I'm grateful for.
Yeah. I'm grateful for that for you too. Yeah. Because I believe it. I mean, we have a similar cohort of age of friends, and infertility is very damaging and so destructive and can cause some deep wounds that are difficult just for a human being to get past. And so I love that God intervened and spared you separation and kept you intact as a couple. Because of course your story goes on to have beautiful, beautiful endings and experiences with Lavelle and your granddaughter. You talk about being an introvert. And your husband, also an introvert.
Yes, which is unusual.
Okay. Yeah. But your personality as an introvert, and yet you do this. Here you are, speaking with me, complete stranger before we sat down. You're away from home now for several days doing exactly this, like back-to-back appointments, showing up with strangers, being vulnerable about your stuff, and talking a lot. That's a very outside of yourself experience. Yes. How are you doing?
Well, last night I was exhausted. I like got to just like shut down point. You know, my poor husband, I was like, I need to go to bed.
Yeah.
He's like, please do.
Good.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, I'll be here and I'll love talking with you and talking with other people, and it's energizing, and I'm passionate about it because I'm passionate about this message. But like when I'm done, I'll probably take a nap.
Yeah.
You know, I'll need to just like go to bed, and I'll probably eat some chocolate and have some coffee.
Yeah, but by yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. You know, I love people and I love being with my friends, but I need time to recharge.
Yeah.
And I could not do this every weekend. Like I know some women are called to be speakers and they can do this every weekend and that fills them. I could not pull that off. So it's just been learning to honor who God made me, which is a big part of what got me to the place where I was so burnt out. I just told myself, like, I'm not enough. You know, there's something wrong with the way that I am because I see other women doing similar things to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But they don't get tired, you know, like they don't.
Right.
Like, so I must be selfish or something must be wrong with me.
But now, do you think that you're just perceiving their situation differently, or they actually are wired differently?
I think they are wired differently. And so, especially having my daughter is a very strong extrovert. And so seeing how she needs to be with people the way I need to be by myself was very eye-opening.
Right.
But even that part of the process was saying, okay, this is who God made me, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like, it's the same wiring that enables me to happily sit at a coffee shop by myself for hours every morning and write this book. You know, it's God's not motivated to change how he made me because he made me for his purpose. I was just putting human expectations on myself. That he had never said, Holly, you have to speak 20 times a year, or when you're at a conference, you have to spend every single second with big groups of people. Like, those are things I just take it on myself. And I think we all do that. Like, I think my fellow introverts would probably lean toward that. I think extroverts might tell themselves, well, I need to be able to be quieter sometimes, or I need to be more serious, or, you know, whatever it is. And so I think it's just recognizing, like, this is who God made me. This is how I can leverage it as a strength. And these are my limitations, and knowing those is not a failure on my part. It's actually good stewardship. And it took me a really long time to learn that.
Yeah, I think so. I believe it. I mean, but you seem to have come by these conclusions, these whys, very honestly. So with some counseling that you've already referenced, and just introspection and spending time, and then coming to understand that you are wired a certain way and that it's okay. That's a really good conclusion to come to. It's very protective going forward. So that's so good to have landed there for you. You know, you talk about in your book another concept. You talk about conflict. I mean, you open up with an experience of being very hurt. And then you go on and talk about healing conflict, and that there's a time when conflict needs to be entered into because there's something that you need to receive from being there and addressing the conflict and being present in this uncomfortable situation. How have you had that experience? It sounds like you've had some hurts. It sounds like you've had some disappointments. How have you sat in the conflict in order to experience healing?
Yeah, I hate conflict, like hate it. It makes me nervous. Like if I order something at a restaurant and the waiter looks at me sideways, I'm instantly like, I'm sorry. You know, and I analyze it for like days. And so I found that a lot of times in my relationships, it was hard for me to speak the truth in love because I would rather just go along with whatever or pretend I hadn't been hurt or, you know, and over time that builds up resentment and pain on the inside. And so like the situation where I was hurt with this friend, my natural instinct would have been to pretend like everything was fine. And I'd always been able to do that, and for whatever reason, this time I couldn't. And it completely scared me because I thought, I don't want to address this. But eventually I did. I got the guts to say, you know what? I got really hurt, and I care about our relationship, and so I need you to know that. And
how did that go?
It was very hard and scary, but it led to healing in our relationship, where otherwise I might have just said I was fine, but distance would have just grown between us.
So was she open initially? Like when you initially said, this hurt me?
Yeah, thankfully she was.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know that's not always the case.
Right.
I know some people just can't receive that. And so if
But
someone's listening and saying, you know, that is not possible for me, I hear you. Like, I hear you. Sometimes that is just not possible because the other person doesn't have a receptive heart. And if that's the case, like, it's not our responsibility to force something to happen. But in this case, thankfully, she was receptive. And so that was kind of a big way, but also in small ways, I've just been trying to learn how to speak the truth in love, even if it's just someone asking, where do you want to go for dinner? Instead of saying, oh, I don't care, when actually I really want Thai food.
Yeah,
but
right.
I don't want to say I want Thai food because I want everybody to be happy.
Right, and you just want to agree.
You know, so you're practicing being like, how about Thai food? You know, which sounds so ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous even to me as I'm saying it. That something that small would be scary.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
But when you do that all the time in every relationship, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I had to learn how to speak the truth in love because that's what we're asked to do, even when it's hard or scary.
So how do you navigate that though? Because, I mean, we all have diverse relationships, right? You've got work relationships, family relationships, people you have in other circles of your life relationships. And there's bound to be, well, there's different levels of intimacy with people. There's different common interests, there's different differences, and there's different levels of how deeply you interact.
Yeah.
And yet there are, I think, all kinds of conflicts, or when you come up against someone and they're not exactly on the same page as you and you wonder about expressing yourself. And so how do you figure out which conflict you really should address? I mean, if you addressed all the conflicts thinking, well, there's going to be some healing in here if I just go for it, I actually think it's impossible. I think it is exhausting. And I think actually it's almost preservative to sometimes just recognize there's conflict, recognize it, walk away from it, and try not to be hurt by it, and focus on another area, maybe another conflict. How do you discern which conflicts you wade into?
Yeah, for me, it's if I don't say anything, I'm going to feel resentment toward that person.
Okay.
You know, some things I could totally just let go. You know, like, oh, they're having a bad day, they didn't mean that. Or, you know, I really don't care where we go to dinner tonight. Or, like, just whatever it is. But there are times when I know if I'm not honest, I will resent that person. You know, that will be a hard spot in my heart. I will harden my heart toward them.
Right.
And then for me, that means I've probably got to go ahead and address that so that I can move forward. In some way, because again, you can't always do that directly with that person. Like I would say someone who has like an abusive parent, that's probably not ever going to be possible. So that might mean I address that by going to counseling, or I address it by telling my best friend, man, I just had a really painful conversation and I can't bring it to resolution, but I don't want to get stuck, so I need to process this with you. Or, you know, whatever it is, it's just whatever you need to do to keep your heart from getting hard. And I think that's different for all of us, you know? I almost feel like I don't fully know how to answer that question, because what I would say from my own heart is totally different than what you would need for your heart, or what someone listening would need for theirs. But I think we all know when we choose to harden our hearts toward another person in our lives. When we choose that over whatever is going to encourage love and relationship and connection and forgiveness. So I would say just recognizing it and then thinking, what do I need to do to be able to keep my heart open?
Because I can imagine some of the negative self-talk at the time when you're wanting to process, is this a conflict I address, is, oh, I'm just taking this too seriously. Like, I'm just wired in such a way that everything hurts my feelings. I'm really sensitive. I have to deal with that on my own, be a little less sensitive. But that is really a way to probably talk yourself out of addressing the conflict, and something that you would have to overcome in order to actually go there with somebody and allow some healing in a relationship.
And sometimes it's just about waiting, you know, because I am sensitive. And so sometimes I will just like get my feelings hurt, and I think, I'll wait this out, you know, I'm not going to do anything about it now. I'm just going to wait. And then a lot of times the next day I got some sleep or a good meal or, you know, whatever, the weather changed and I'm fine. So then I just don't worry about it. But if it's still there a week or a month, if it's just like a pebble in my shoe, you know, and I know it's not going to go away unless there's some kind of intentional action on my part, then I know it's time to address this in some way, which again doesn't necessarily mean one-on-one with that person. It may be in another way.
Holley, in your book, another concept that I loved that you brought to light is you talk about being small and ordinary and letting go of ego. And that this is even like a desired endpoint in how you end up considering yourself. It's so in contrast really to, you know, society being very, like, giving us all these messages about being ambitious and driven and results and even promoting yourself. I mean, there's not a problem in society for putting yourself on a platform and speaking very loudly about your accomplishments in order to be bolstered up and have a bigger influence and continue your good work, right? So how, even with your degree of success, which is quite admirable, how have you still managed to continue to come to that conclusion?
Yeah, I think that's something I need to have people in my life who I know love me just for me. That if I shut down everything I do tomorrow, they'd be like, all right, let's go get tacos. You know, like that would be the extent of it.
Right.
And so for me, that's my husband. I have some best friends that like were with me before all this started. They'll be with me probably in the old folks' home, you know, and my family. And they are kind of my anchor, you know, and they remind me like, this is who you are. And they remind me when I get out of balance, you know, like when I start saying yes to everything out of fear, all those things, they'll be like, Holley, you know, come back home. And I've been fortunate to have some really wonderful examples in my life, especially my grandparents. You know, my mom's parents had a small Christian bookstore in a little town and made a huge difference in my life. My dad's parents got out of poverty, and my dad was born to my grandma when she was 15. You know, she went back and got her high school degree because she had dropped out, and then college, and you know, is still serving faithfully, teaching a Sunday school class every Sunday of women her age. And so I've had some people just show me, like, long-term over a lifetime, like, it's really about relationships. It's not about accomplishments. And so just going back to that over and over again.
Right. I mean, I think also there must be a balance to strike with you, because your work is really so much around being open and vulnerable and talking about your real life lessons and exposing some of the ugly stuff. How do you do that, as well as really, how do you keep that in check it in balance with being also a professional, being seen as competent? Because that's also required of you. When you're doing a book tour, when you're sitting in on an interview, you need to have a certain presence, and you can't be a puddle on the floor. and yet your work is so much about like exposing, being real, absolutely what's on my mind, knowing who I am genuinely, authentically at all times. I mean, this is kind of the message that you bring forward. And yet, of course, you're a professional, and there is sometimes the exterior is going to look a bit more polished than what's going on the inside. How do you make that decision as you navigate through?
Well, I think just reminding myself the hard things I talk about are my circumstances, but they're not my identity. You know, like I don't sit here and say like I'm an infertile woman or I'm a depressed person. I say I struggled with infertility. I sometimes struggle with depression.
Yeah.
That's not Holley. You know, that's not my identity. That's just something I went through. You know, it's like you're on a road trip and you drive through a town. You don't say you live there. You know, or I'm a citizen of this place. Like.
Okay. Okay.
So I don't find any shame or guilt in that. And also when people look at me, I don't want them to ever put me on a pedestal. You know, when they hear my story, I want them to see Jesus. And I love that verse that says we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And if I only tell the parts of my story that make me look good, then I am covering up so much of what God has done in my life. I am stealing his glory. And I am never going to do that. I would rather walk away completely than have people think that I have it all together. And I've been freed by other women who have been brave enough to say, this is what's going on with me. And so I want to do that for my sisters too, you know? And so I don't know, I feel like at the end of the day, that's what helps me remember. It's just not about me. It's not about us, you know? And that is a beautiful, freeing thing. So,
can I share with you my favorite line from your book?
I would love that.
I want to go to page 49, and it caught me off guard. I mean, you talk about vulnerable things and very heartfelt, and then I'm reading to the end of the chapter you call Mango Closet, chapter 8, and you say this, and you're quoting a writing from elsewhere, but you do say, describing kind of the human condition, we live in the tension of the already and the not yet. I have been redeemed, I am being redeemed. I am made new, I am being made new. We belong to the kingdom, but for now, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah, and those actually are not my words. They're
I know.
Caitlin's. Yes, she is my fantastic assistant and
Caitlin
a blogger
Bouchard.
and a writer, and so I would tell everybody, go find her because she's so extraordinary.
So you've included her words
Yeah.
as part of something that you believe in. I love that picture that Caitlin and you have created because it does put it into this beautiful perspective. There's just a sense of togetherness and of community and that we're on our way. And of course, we share Christian faith. I am a Jesus follower, and I believe that, that this is really a period of time of my living here on earth. But after death, there'll be that face-to-face and that home where we belong, and living in heaven and being with Jesus. And gosh, it's almost hard to describe because we don't know exactly what it's going to be like. We just know it's going to be better and it's worth longing for, and it's what's been set in our hearts. And so I love how you describe it that way. Are you often able to come to that conclusion, or do you get mired down in the circumstances that you're living in?
I think both. I mean, you know, we're human, and so I think we all have moments when we forget what's true and where we're just in the day-to-day. And even I have a friend that I'll text and be like, I forgot what's true, can you tell me again? And she'll text me back and be like, here's what's true, you know? And so, or I just don't always emotionally feel it because, you know, who knows what something hard is going on. But like that talks about we're all on our way home. I feel like I know my way home now. You know, I know my way back to the places where I feel brave and strong and know who I am, you know, even if I wander around a bit. So.
You also take on the concept of prayer in your book. You talk about praying wrongly, and I have never heard it described exactly the way you write about it. You talk about if someone had described to me how to communicate with my husband, it would frustrate me completely and probably shut me up, because no one can really tell me how to communicate with my husband. We've both been married 17 years, and I thought about how you wrote that, and I believe you. I believe you. And so prayer is that way. it's an ongoing conversation. It's a lifelong conversation with multiple stops and starts. And so you talk about how you'll probably never pray correctly, because a conversation is not about being correct. How did you come to that idea? How did you, I mean, as a Christian, how did you come to where you really feel comfortable and understand prayer that way?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in an environment religiously where it was like you were supposed to do things a certain way. Even like being vulnerable was not okay. It was like have a smile on your face. And, you know, and with prayer, it was like do it like this. You know, there's like these acronyms or formulas or instructions for this is how you need to pray. And I always struggled so much with that, partly because I'm an introvert. And so I don't talk a lot in general. Like even with the people I love most, like I love just, like you were saying, sitting with my husband, and sometimes we don't say anything, and there's an intimacy to that silence that is beautiful, because you can't do that with everyone. So I would feel that with God, but I would think, I must not be spiritual enough, or I need to, you know, try harder to pray in these certain ways. And so I think just coming to the place of realizing what I really wanted in my prayer times was connection with God. And He knew how I was made. And so that meant it was okay if I was quiet when I prayed, or when it was really informal, or I just said, this is what's on my heart, or whatever it was, that it was really about connection. It wasn't about like going to the principal's office and needing to have this formal speech prepared. It was just about being with God.
That's so cool. That's good. Holley, you say you finished writing the book about a year ago. And in the book, Fiercehearted is all about living fully and loving bravely. In this past year, has there been a time that comes to your mind where you yourself were fulfilling exactly this definition? What would you say has been a time and an example of you living fierce-heartedly, an experience where you were fierce-hearted?
Well, what comes to mind first was when my granddaughter Ellie was born. So I got to be in the room. And so, yeah, at the very end when she was about to come, like I was literally on one side of my daughter and her husband was on the other, and that's a very intense part of the process, and I didn't know what I would say, you know, or what I would do. And I found myself saying over and over, you're strong, you're brave, you can do this. You're strong, you're brave, you can do this, you know. And she was like, I'm not going to get through this, you know. And I knew she was almost there and that this was necessary for like life and for this miracle to happen, but she didn't know if she could get to that place. And that's where I had been, and that's where I wanted to see my sisters go to. So I still feel with this book, in a lot of ways, it's like I'm standing next to my sisters saying like, you're strong, you're brave, you can do this. And I think we all need that reminder sometimes. You know, I have to say that to my own heart a lot, and I'm sure I will for the rest of my life, but that just really was powerful to me. And then when I held Ellie for the first time, I didn't know what I would do or say, or it's all new to me. And so I was holding her and I found myself just praying over her and then just saying, someday you're going to be a fierce-hearted woman. And that added a whole new layer to why this matters so much to me. Because yeah, we need this, but the generations coming behind us, like even more so, you know, I think they're going to have battles to fight that we have not encountered. And they are, to me, a generation of warriors that are rising up to fight in some really powerful, beautiful ways. And so I want this for us, for my sisters, but I want it even more for my daughters and my granddaughters, that we can help them know what it means to be fierce-hearted women.
Well, Holley, thank you so much. I mean, you've sat here across from me and given me this message, and it's a good message to hear. It resonates pretty deeply, and I so appreciate your vulnerability in the telling. Your message wouldn't be as authentic unless you shared where it came from, and these are good words, and to be fierce-hearted and to live fully and to love bravely. That's good stuff. I want it for my daughters too.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thanks so much for being here. So if you'd like to connect with Holley, you can go to holleygerth.com and find you there, and just lean in. Of course, pick up a copy of her book. I think it's coming out this coming week.
Yes, October 3rd.
Exactly. So this is very timely, October 3rd. And so pick up a copy of the book, but of course go to Holley's website and find out more about her work and what she's doing, and how she's communicating this message of fierce-heartedness for us all. That's good for us to hear. You can also, thank you so much for joining us today. You could also connect with me. I'm on Facebook at Intersection with Rose. You can subscribe to the Intersection Show on iTunes, and or also right at my website, iwrzm.com, and there you can listen in on previous episodes. I'd love to hear from you at Intersection, or even here at Face Strong Today. We'd love to hear your feedback or your questions, and so you could share your comments with sending us an email at hello@facestrongtoday.com, and please go ahead and share this episode with someone who you'd like to share it with. So thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Holley.
Thank you, Rose.
Yeah.